Hey, everybody. Special episode of Mark and Jake Try to Make It today. We got Big Jake Hovis, as always. We
That's
also
right.
have Elon Altman from New York City. Welcome, Elon.
Yeehaw, good to be here.
Yeah, first ever guest for Mark and
Really?
Jake Try to Make It.
First ever guest. Very exciting.
Oh man, that's a lot of pressure.
Elon, have you made it?
I have not made it.
Okay, well then you're welcome.
But I'm on this because we're all trying to make it, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Well, Elon, you're here for a special reason. We'll get into all kinds of stuff, but Jake and I have been talking a lot about comedians coming up through the system in New York City. And you're somebody who has had success and came up through New York City. So we definitely want to ask you about that at some point. Were you born in New York? Where are you from originally?
Yeah, I'm born and raised. I'm a rare, real New York comedian, and that I was. My family's been on the Lower East Side of Manhattan for over 100 years.
Wow.
So I've only lived in Manhattan my whole life, except for a stint in college upstate. So I am a New Yorker.
Okay, through and through. Amazing. So did you do your first open mic in New York City?
Yeah, I did, which I think is also probably a little. Well, I guess it's not that rare. There's millions of people here. But yeah, it was a shocking experience for sure.
Yeah, it's fun. So I think what Mark is trying to set me up in this episode, which is totally fine, right? Because I had a hot take, and it was. I went to New York City recently. I did a couple of open mics. I went to a showcase, and I was unimpressed. I also thought because you know when you're not a New York City comedian, you think New York City, those are the best of the best. Those guys are going to be absolutely phenomenal. And I went to one of the open mics, or two of the open mics, and they were awful. They are way worse than anything that we have in Kentucky. Like, why would anybody do that? That's my question. So,
well, New York City has a high degree of mental illness, and also therapists are expensive. So a lot of people are at those open mics because it's just their way of saying something. And you'll see years later, you'll see the same insane person saying the same 3 minutes, and it's just crazy. I feel like New York City, look, it is the home of comedy. It has the most stand-up comedians probably of any scene in the world.
Yep.
We always try to guess, like, what is it? Are there 5,000 comedians, 10,000? It's a lot of people who do it to some regular degree. And so, you know, there's that story of like the mouse that falls into the bucket of cream and he keeps swimming until he makes it into cheese or butter and he swims out. I feel like New York City is like you have a lot of mice that are at the top that are churning the butter, and then there's a lot of dead mice at the bottom that are still in the bucket, and that's what you might get at some of these places, because they're not everyone is trying to improve. It's just that it's a fun thing for them to do.
Yeah. And
also you get like these mics, as you know, from doing a few of them, like we don't have real audience members that come to these things. So it's just every comedian waiting for their turn. And they've been through this so many times. They've heard these insane rantings. So they're not paying attention. They're waiting for their own thing.
Then that's basically the thought is, how could you possibly go from zero to decent when no one's ever listening?
Yeah, it's hard. That's why I think a lot of people get discouraged or just don't know how to get out of that system. I was stuck in that sort of world for maybe 10 years before certain breaks happened, or I got out of that mindset of like being there and waiting for something to happen to me. I figured I have to do a little bit more to make something happen.
Wow.
Yeah. So tell us more about how you successfully churn that proverbial cream.
Sure.
How did you?
Still churning it, but well, so the first time I ever tried to do stand up, I went to a mic and I had an experience kind of like you, Big Jake. It feels funny to say that. Maybe I'll just say Jake. So I went to this mic because me and a friend who didn't live in New York, we were friends because we both were giant Norm Macdonald fans. This is before anyone else was a Norm Macdonald fan. We were early adopters, and we both said this summer, we both should do an open mic in our city. So we both like wrote our like 5 minutes of material, whatever. And it was like the day I was going to go do it. I went to New York Comedy Club to sign up for their Tuesday night mic. And I was like 25th on the list. So I went into the room and it was just horrible. I was just watching every comedian go up there. There was this comic who maybe is still around named Angry Bob, who was just a giant angry man who would just heckle it was like, this is a mic. Why are you heckling people? But they all kind of knew each other. So maybe that was part of it. It was like, oh, that's Angry Bob. He does that. And it was so terrifying. But I had tickets to go with a friend to the Comedy Cellar to go watch a show later that night. And I was running low on time now. So I went out to the front desk and I said, hey, I can't be here for my turn. Also, I didn't want to do it, but I was like, I can't be here for my turn. Can I have my $3 back that I paid for this mic? And he was like, you know what? On Thursday, there's a bringer show where you could just bring 5 friends and it's like a regular show and you could do your 5 minutes then. And I was like, all right, I'll do that. And so my first show was actually a bringer show there. And that was way better. It went well, and it was a great audience. And that encouraged me a lot. There was a comedian there who taught the class at that comedy club who saw me, and he was like, oh, wow, like you're really funny. That was your first time. Do you want to come perform for my class? So I did that. So that helped me right off the bat think, okay, I'm not the worst person at this, even from the beginning. But then I just got into this world of only doing bringer shows for like years. And it wasn't on a regular basis. It was like every few months, someone would say, hey, are you still doing comedy? I'd be like, yeah, I'll do a show. I'll book a show. And then I would book a show around that. But I had no momentum and I had no way of knowing like what actually you do to move forward in this. So I would do some mics. I would do bringers here and there. Yeah. But this went on for years. And there was a time when I went over a year without doing a set at all. And I was still writing jokes. But I just I just didn't know what to do. I was so flabbergasted by the industry. And one thing that also like early on kind of messed me up, I think, was that maybe 5 or 6 shows in, 2 different agents saw me because I was really young back then. And I looked really young. I look young now, but I looked really, really young then. They thought I was some kind of like 12-year-old prodigy. So they were like, and these were like real legit agents. And they were like, oh, you're really good. like I want you to come back to like backstage at Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn. We'll introduce you to the comedians. All these kind of things were happening. And I was like, this is great. And it's so easy to meet people. But I was in college. So I was like, yeah, I got to go back to school, but I'll come back and deal with this later. It all felt like an opportunity that would just be there for me later. And then it never came up again. But I always had this misconception that like at a bringer show, there will be agents there to see you. And that's, and they always tell the comics, there's going to be industry there. It's like, there's rarely industry or anyone who gives a shit about you. So it took a long time to bust out of that area of my mind of like doing these shows that went nowhere.
Yeah.
That's wild. So where did that, like, first off, why would you take a year off at a time? Like, did you just, you had life going on? And when did you kind of turn the corner and start taking it more seriously?
I was, it was like life stuff. I was, I had my job, and it's really hard when you're working after you get home from working for 8 hours to say, now I got to go back out again. And I'm a lazy person by nature. I want to just sit down and watch TV. So that already is like hard to say, I'm just going to go out and find a mic. Like, I respect every comedian who does that. And look, and this is me living in Manhattan when mics are maybe 10 blocks away from me or less all the time. Because there's mics everywhere. And there was a comedy club back then called the Laugh Lounge that was literally in my neighborhood. It has now since closed, but I never even stepped foot in that place. All these things were just like so foreign to me of how to like figure anything out in this industry. So I was lazy. I also was like playing a lot of poker back then. So my weekends I was often playing poker, which was a time suck. What eventually got me out of it was a bringer show actually, but it was a friend of mine. He was like, maybe, what about this one? I got an email for this one called the Industry Room, which is a thing that Broadway Comedy Club was running. And I think they still run it. And it sounded a little bit more legit. Like there was actually going to be the owner of the club was going to be there, the booker of the club, and you can maybe get some spots out of it. So I was like, all right, I'll do this like one more try. I'll see what happens kind of thing. And I did that. And it was one of those really frustrating shows where they tell you like, don't worry, you're going to get a spot. That's not the check spot. We know you have people here and you're trying to get a tape and you're trying to be seen by industry. And we don't want you to be stuck while everyone's doing their checks. And of course, I got stuck with the check spot, and I still had a really good set, but I was so pissed off by that whole situation. So afterwards, the owner of the club, Al Martin, who has recently passed away in the last year or so, he was giving me feedback because at that point he was giving everyone feedback in person. And he was like, you're really good, but you really got to be up on stage like at least once a week. And I was just so frustrated. I was like, how do you want me to do that if you're not booking me? Like, where do I do? Like, I was like talking back to him. Like, I was so frustrated. I was like done with it all. And then he was like, well, we have this like internship thing. Like, you could do a thing where you help seat people at the show once a week, and then we'll throw you like a 5-minute spot once a week on a different show. And I wanted to say no, because I was like, look, I have a job. Like, I don't need to be doing free work for you for some crappy spot. But then I was like, all right, yeah, sure, whatever. And like, luckily I said yes to that, because that's what actually then got me into the comedy world finally. Because then I was working at a comedy club. I was actually seeing working comedians on the nights that I was working to see people. I got to see people like in early stages, like regulars there were like Mark Normand and Sam Morrill and Ricky Velez and Emma Willman and Nathan McIntosh and Phil Hanley, all these people that I love. And they were like they were early on. They were like the booked comics, but they were still, not that far into their journey. Maybe a couple of them had just gotten their first TV spot or something like that. But it was exciting. I was like, whoa, comedy is way better than the people I've been doing bringer shows with. And like, I had always been thinking, I'm so good. Like, I'm one of the best ones on these bringer shows. And then you're like, oh, wait a second. Like, these guys are miles ahead of me. And so just by watching and learning and getting to know people and networking and then getting to do spots on these shows and seeing what works and what doesn't, that kind of got me into the club scene in a little way, which then helped, different things then happened after that point.
That's amazing.
So you really weren't like this open mic grinder, like just doing a bunch of spots at open mics, and that's how you got you. It seems like you pretty early, where you're doing bringer shows, you're doing shows at this club that you kind of bartered with, like decent stuff, really early.
Yeah, so it's a weird thing because I see a lot of comedians now that, everyone has like their friend group or like the class they came up with. And I always feel a little bit removed from that because I don't feel like I had people that I was grinding with in the open mics. And then it's like I kind of skipped around a lot in ways and like popped in areas and then got lucky in places too. I definitely put the time in, certainly a lot of time. But I kind of missed the hardcore grinding at the mics. I did a lot of Laughing Buddha mics, but this was after I had basically started getting back into it in terms of interning at the club. Then I had a friend from childhood who had a monthly show at a bar, so I was able to do like a monthly spot with him. So all of a sudden I was getting a little bit more traction in terms of just getting reps. And then I also started doing these Laughing Buddha mics, which I think were really helpful too. Laughing Buddha is a company that does mics in New York City, and some people put them down because it's a little bit more expensive than other mics. There's like a fee you pay and you have to buy a drink, and other ones don't require you to do that. But what they do, which is nice, is they do have rules like you can't look at your notes in the audience. You have to like sort of pay attention to the comics. And that's helpful, I think, because it's like you at least feel like people are listening to you. Yeah. So I always, some people put those mics down because I think it's like a money grab, but I think that they are better than others in some ways.
Huh. Ricky Velez is headlining Downtown Comedy Works this weekend. So he's done pretty well.
Yeah. Oh, he's awesome. He was, always from those early stages, I was like, this guy's got something really, really funny. His perspective is very unique, and the way he delivers his jokes is great. He's also a real New Yorker. He's a Queens guy. So
look at that.
He has stories that I could relate to.
Yeah. So, hey, Jake, I got a question for you. What Elon said about seeing great comedy really resonated with me. Like, I love going to, last night I saw Dana Gould at Comedy Works at the South Club. And I run shows with like Nathan McIntosh has been out several times. And I really think that like watching comedians who are 10 times or 100 times better than you are really is inspiring. And it not only like gives you motivation to become a better comedian, but it also like it's educational to watch, to see how they handle certain situations. And do you find that as well in Kentucky? Do you get opportunities to see great comedy? And
there's some good comedians that came through. I mean, most recently, the one that's coming to my mind is Derrick Stroup. He came through Comedy Off Broadway, which is in Lexington.
Do you know Derrick, Elon?
Yeah. He recently got into the Comedy Cellar. He also hosted a JFL audition that I did this spring. That was like a horrible show. Not his fault, but we both were talking about it recently, how horrible this audience was. He's awesome. He's great.
Yeah, so he came to Lexington, which was like an hour away, and I just went just to see him, and he was so good. I was inspired, and also probably for a moment, like, man, he's so like a little discouraged because he was so good. I mean, the host and the feature, I'm like, okay, I could be friends with those guys. And then there's this other dude who's like way further down the road there, and so it would be cool to be that good. So I don't know. It's fun. You're probably a little bit more optimistic than I am. I see a really good comedian, I'm like, and you're like, hey, maybe one day.
Yeah, I get that, because it's like you see some people and you're just like, how did you even think of that? How does your mind work that way? It's not even just like you see someone who's doing a joke in the style that you know how to do a certain, maybe it's the same kind of thing, a misdirection that you might also have in your act, but the way that they do it just seems like, oh, that was a good idea that they thought of that particular way to do it. But sometimes people do stuff that you're like, whoa, that's like way different than I could have ever thought of. And that's just seems like you're playing in a different sport than I am. And that can be discouraging, but also like motivating. You're like, wow, it's awesome that people can do this.
Yeah, well, Derrick does that rant style where he's yelling, he's really upset about something super trivial. One of my favorite bits that he's mad at like the sunset. It's so silly and whatever. And but I don't, when I'm on stage, I'm trying to be positive and bubbly almost, and so I never rant. But then you see a rant just murder this whole room. Like, should I change everything that I do? I don't know what.
Yeah, I think that's tough though. I think that's style changes that are so severe. I think it's hard to say like, now I'm going to become a rant comic, because that's just fits him. That's who he is. And although honestly, someone named Big Jake, I would assume would be a ranting kind of guy.
Well, I think there's also something to be said for seeing like Nathan McIntosh and these other great comedians, or Sam Morril, early on. Maybe they weren't as good as they are today, and Alon got to see that progression. Like I used to see Stroup at open mics. I mean, he was very, very good at that time, but he was like in the stratosphere. Now he's like, on his way to Mars or whatever. He's incredible. If I saw him today, I might want to quit comedy immediately. But to be able to see the progression and to realize, oh, he's 15 years in. Yeah. You can, you don't start day one being that amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny when I think back to those times of seeing these comics, which in hindsight now it's early in their careers, but back then it still like felt like, wow, they're fantastic. And I still feel the same way watching them now. Even though they probably would consider themselves to be much, much better, to me, they're still always like they were really great back then and they're really great now, which is interesting. I feel like I can still think of some bits from like way back when from some of these people that are some of my favorite bits. But maybe what it is as you get better and better at it, some of these people, they churn material so much faster now. So it's sort of like a band, like that first album is going to be fantastic. They've been working on it for so long, but then what happens in your next few releases? Like, are you going to have staying power or are you a one-hit wonder? And a lot of these comics that we're talking about have that staying power where maybe they put out like several hours and like the quality is still so great. That's a testament to how great they are.
Yeah. So where did you go from there? You're interning at this comedy club.
Yeah, so I'm interning at New York Comedy Club, and at this time, so New York Comedy Club used to be owned by Al Martin. So just a little background on like the New York scene. Al Martin owned 3 clubs: Broadway Comedy Club, New York Comedy Club, and Greenwich Village Comedy Club. Around 2014, he sold New York Comedy Club to Emilio and Scott, who are the owners of it currently, and they've done amazing things. It's one of the top clubs in the city. It was not like that back then. It was like this small, dingy side club. It was where I first did my very first bringer show. This is already like almost 10 years before I had started interning at this place, which is crazy. But it was I would be interning on a Tuesday night. There would be maybe 8 people would show up. Seating them was the easiest thing because you just say, oh, yeah, just go sit in the front, done. It was like the easiest job. And then I get to watch comedy. But it was a crappy place, really, because it wasn't like the main club for Al. He had other ones that he focused on more. When he sold it, it was great for the club, but it also meant that the internship program for me ended. So because they weren't doing things the same way. So I was like, all right, well, I don't have that. Although I had made good connections and I was friends with the new owners and I was still getting some spots there and everything. But what happened right around that time was that I had my audition at the Comic Strip, which is a famous club on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And they have this lottery audition once a year. Every comic lines up around the block. There's probably might be like 400 or 500 people lining up for an audition time slot.
Whoa.
And they'll give you it's like a random, they pull out of a hat and you get a certain number and then that ties to a certain date. And so your date might be 9 months in the future. Like come back and do at the end of the show on Tuesday, May 3rd, you're going to do, your 5 minutes for whoever's left in the audience. And this is
They
an
give you
audition.
5 minutes?
Yeah, you get 5 minutes.
Okay. When you said 500 people, I'm like, oh, you get 30 seconds.
Well, no, because you're getting like, there's 2 auditions per show.
Okay.
So they're splitting you amongst 250 different shows, basically.
Okay.
So I got my audition time. I had my audition at that club right around this time, which is like spring of, 2014 or something. And I passed that audition. That was huge because then all of a sudden I was part of the late night. I was passed for late night at the Comic Strip. And what late night is they have every night they would have an 8:00 show. And when the show officially ended, when the booked comics were, basically done, the host would pass it off to the late night host. And then there would be 10 comics, kind of like a booked mic, basically. But for the audience, they kind of just moved it over smoothly. So the audience wouldn't necessarily know that they could leave at this point. They eventually got caught on as the comedy got worse. And they were like, wow, we've been here for a long time. Why is this still happening? But if you were lucky and you happen to get an early spot on the late night, you might have a full audience there. And even if you had a later spot and there were still 10 stragglers, that wasn't bad. It was still better than a mic because you had real audience members that were there to hear your 5 minutes. And you got to hang out for hours with all these other late night comics or with the comics who were booked on the show. And a lot of great comics came through that system as well. And this is, another place where like you just build a network of comedians and maybe they're running other shows at some bar and they'll say, oh, why don't you do my spot here and this and that. And there, you could do late night as many nights as you wanted. So I could do that 4 nights a week if I wanted to, or 5 nights a week. So all of a sudden now I have access to shows basically almost on an unlimited basis. As long as I wanted to go up to the Upper East Side, sign up, wait around for 2 hours, it was there for me. So now I didn't have this internship anymore, but I had like basically feeling like I was in a club. And that late night at the Comic Strip, and let me just describe the way this thing worked actually a little bit more. Late night at the Comic Strip is you get there if you're there before 9:00, you sign up and they get 10 names on this list. And then they bring it into the owner of the club, who's the one who auditioned us, which is this guy named Richie Tinkin, who passed away a couple of years ago. This guy used to be Eddie Murphy's manager. He discovered Eddie Murphy in the 80s. And if you watch like old clips of Eddie Murphy, first of all, from his specials, sometimes in the backstage part before the special starts, you'll see this like guy with like white hair and sunglasses and a tracksuit, this like old white Italian dude or whatever he was. And like, you're like, oh, that's Richie. Or like he was on Letterman and like, Eddie Murphy would be talking and be like, hey, Richie. And like, there'll be like a back and forth with this guy. And you're like, oh, I know this guy now. It was weird. But anyway, he would take this list and he would rearrange it. And that was always like kind of a mind fuck because you would feel like where you were in the hierarchy because you'd be like, all right, I got there early. I signed up first. And then you look at the final list and you're like, I'm 9th. Great. Okay. There's going to be no one left in the audience for me. This sucks. But you'd stick it out. He would see who would stick it out. He'd always put you kind of at the bottom when you were sort of new. And then some people get discouraged and wouldn't show up, but he would notice who was still showing up even with that. And maybe you'd start moving up to 3rd or 4th, which are really good spots in the lineup. And then you'd feel like, all right, I think he likes me. He'd call you into the office sometimes and tell you Eddie Murphy stories. It was all really exciting. It was pretty cool. And he passed me like for regular spots at the club, which was then awesome. Like once in a while, I'd be getting a regular paid 20-minute spot at the Comic Strip amongst these amazing comics who get booked there. So I was like, eking my way out of the late night as well into some regular spots. And then around that time, I got booked to do this TV show, which was Gotham Comedy Live, which is a show on this cable channel called Access TV, not public access. It was AXS TV. And it was literally a live stand-up show, broadcast live nationwide on cable from Gotham Comedy Club. And that was insane because it's not like it's live on tape and they could edit it afterwards. Like you literally, if something weird happens in your set or you just totally get frazzled and die on stage and forget your act, it's just out there. It's on TV, and there's nothing you could do about it. And then that was huge because then I had a credit, which meant a lot, and that helped open some more doors in different areas.
Yeah, it's interesting you talking about showing up first and then getting put later in the order. Mark is in Denver. I started in Denver, and that was the open mic in Denver where you would show up. Doesn't matter how early you show up, they don't go even close to list order. And if they don't know you, they're going to put you way late. And there were times, and I was a high school teacher at the time, and so I'm doing this on a Monday after teaching all day, and then I have to go back to work the next morning. And you get there at 5 to sign up first. It starts at 7, and then they don't put you on until like 11:30. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So it's not like the open mic scene in Denver is any better.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know if that's a good system or not.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely weeds out people who aren't taking it seriously, I guess.
It weeds them out, but does it also? I mean, there's like a bit of a discouragement. I know every comic feels this of like, oh, they're just putting their friends up early, or okay, because this is so and so who likes this person, like they get all this special treatment, and I'm always like left in the back. And we all have those kind of feelings with anything. Like, why is this person getting booked more than me? How come that happens for this? And like you try to weed those thoughts out, but it always like finds its way in no matter what show you're doing, what level you're doing. There's always a little bit of that in there.
So at this point, when you get that credit and you're doing these late night spots, and you mentioned that sometimes you'd get spots on other people's shows that you were hanging out with, waiting for the late night order. Did you run any shows at this point? Have you run any shows at all?
I attempted it. I had a friend from camp, like from summer camp, who was like a co-owner. He had just opened up a pizza place that had it was like a speakeasy pizza place. So behind like a dollar slice kind of store, you push this back wall, and then there's like a little lounge for like, for him, he was thinking like nightlife, private parties, whatever. And he was like, hey, I love that you're doing comedy. Like, what do you think about doing a show here? And I was like, yeah, maybe I could do that. Because that seems to be a good way in New York City. That is a great way of networking, is saying, hey, I have a show. I'm going to book you on my show, and maybe you'll book me on your show. There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. And it's also a way, if there's comics that you respect and like and want to get to know better, you can book them on your show, and then you have a reason to hang out with them a little bit, and some common ground there. So I did like 2 of them there. It wasn't the best. The venue wasn't set up very well, seating wise. There's always problems with things like that. There's a certain formula that makes a show good, and this place had like a swimming pool kind of setup of like every seat was like around the edge of the place, so the comics were far from it. And so I did 2 of them, but then I was like, you know what, the hassle of producing a show, I mean, I give it up to you guys. If I know, Mark, you produce shows, and Jake
doesn't do much.
I don't do much.
It's hard, man. It's the hardest thing. It's a thankless job. And then you also have the thing where you're like, I'm a comic, but now people think of me as a producer, and you don't want that to happen too much, right? Like you want to be a comic who also produces, and not just as a producer who people forget even does comedy. And I know that's always something that there's a lot of comics in the city who people just think of as producing shows because they don't even realize that they're also working on their own stuff. So there's like that pitfall you don't want to fall into too much. So I gave it a try, but it was like the effort of it was too much. And I was feeling like, you know what, I think I'm doing okay with the spots that I'm already getting. I can keep working hard at this way and just do really good when I'm on stage, and just try to be a really, really, really good comic on these shows, and try to get more spots that way rather than try to work on this whole spot trading type of thing.
Well, so at this point, who was in your class that maybe we've heard of or not heard of, but is still working hard and you think maybe deserves some due?
I mean, guys that I was doing like stuff with then, like let's say late night type things, were guys like PD Diabreu, who's one of the funniest guys in New York, who maybe isn't a national name, but he's just hilarious. New York, again, also a local New Yorker. Reg Thomas, Nico White, Phil Hunt, Brian Grassi, a lot of comics that we were all doing late night together, and kind of all sort of in the same sort of vein of stuff, I guess, at that point in time. And many of them are doing great things right now, and all of us in our own way.
Did you have a strategy to kind of focus in on one specific club, or at this time were you also going to other clubs to try and work up their ladder?
I was always trying to find like ways into other clubs, but I'm not a good like just go and hang and try to network without knowing what I'm getting into. So that was always kind of hard. It's tricky to, they're called clubs for a reason. They do kind of feel a little bit like you're at a club and you show up and then you're like, oh, I'm not a member of this club. And you feel a little bit like an outsider sometimes. But I was branching out. I was able to get, some traction at places like Stand Up New York. New York Comedy Club was still booking me. Broadway was booking me. Gotham periodically. So the way it works in New York City at a lot of these clubs is they have their house shows, which are booked by their booker, which are hard to get onto because bookers have kind of their roster of comics. They all have different rules of like how you could audition for them, or whether it's from recommendations or whether they don't do auditions at all. Everyone's different, and you can never figure out. Bookers are very, very confusing. I got to tell you. What they're looking for, and every comic has a different story of how it worked for them, and it's tricky. But also, clubs usually have other nights where they have produced shows where a comic will produce a show and they get to book that show either in full or partially. And so you're able to get your foot in the door in some clubs because you're doing a produced thing at the club, or the club might be running like a little mini festival kind of thing, so you get to know the booker that way. So like slowly you kind of eke your way into different places. But it's interesting. I remember way back then, maybe this is 9 or 10 years ago, I was having a conversation with Brendon Sagalow. We were both working at New York Comedy Club. He had been bar backing there, and we were both doing the same thing, like basically interning at the club for spots. He was farther along. He was hosting shows, which was really cool at that time. And he was just doing a lot of stuff at New York, and I had been trying to branch out to other places more. And we were having a conversation about that, of like
other places like outside of
clubs,
New York City.
No, other clubs in the city, but he felt like I'm trying to remember. We were like in a car and we were just talking about like, does it make sense to like just kind of like stay put in one place versus to try to branch out to other places? I think he made the right decision, which was at that point in time he was focusing a lot on New York Comedy Club, and then New York Comedy Club kind of blew up in a lot of ways, and that was good. And then he blew up. He's awesome. He's so funny. And he's working everywhere, but that happened to be a good place.
He's doing like theaters with Dan Soder, and his
videos are always hilarious. He's just such a funny guy. But I think at that point in time, like you never know in a way, like, okay, if you put all your eggs in a certain club and you're working at that club a lot and not going to other clubs as much, it could be a club that sucks. In which case you're sort of like, no one even knows you exist. You're just somewhere where no one is. The comics that are there aren't working in a lot of other places. You might kind of be in a little bit of a black hole without realizing it. Or you could be at a club that has a lot going on. There's places like The Stand that are like really hip clubs. And if you're part of their roster or regular there, like that's great. That's really cool. And that can lead to a lot of opportunities. So, it's just like the idea like that you want to get really, really well known at one single place versus other places. It can work out or it can't work out. And in some cases it does work out.
Huh.
So have you, at this point, are you leaving New York City at all? I mean,
I was
so much opportunity in New York City, so there's no reason to ever leave.
I was applying to festivals. I thought that was, I mean, I still do. I think that's a really fun way to like, it's great to, first of all, it validates you. If you send a tape to some festival and they accept you, that feels great. So that was like a big thing. I mostly was getting rejections because it's the hardest thing is, number one, having a good tape is impossible. Like you guys know this, whenever you're trying to get a good tape, it never works. Whenever you have that camera rolling, something goes wrong. And when you don't have it rolling, you have to set up life. But I was able to get booked on one pretty early on, which was in Louisville. It was called the Laughing Derby Comedy Festival.
That's kind of my home club. It changed names twice.
This was around the time I think it had been Comedy Caravan, and then it had just been like bought by like Steve Hofstetter, I think was owning it at this point. It was such a weird thing though, because like they booked a lot of comics from the New York scene and everything, and people who I didn't know yet because I still was so new. I didn't really like know like the scene yet, but it was cool like to be booked on this festival. We get to the club and like the club owner, the manager, like didn't realize. He's like, "Oh, is that this weekend?" Like he didn't even know, like there was some like weird, like it was so unorganized. And then they had like the main room because it was really a club with like one room, and then they just set up some chairs in the bar as well. So that was like the side room, and there were no events scheduled like around the shows. So we all felt like, oh man, this is like a weird, like what is this? But it kind of like bonded us, like those of us who did it. Like that's where I met Luke Monas, who's like a hilarious comedian.
I just saw him like a couple weeks ago. He opening for Joe List at Comedy Works.
Oh yeah. So they're both so funny. But it was so funny to like meet Luke there, and we were just like, we talk about it sometimes. Like, what
did you know each other previously, or was that the?
No, I got down there, and then I was like, all the comics were talking, and it was like, oh, you guys are all from New York. I'm from New York, but I didn't know them because I was so out of the scene. I just didn't know like people, you know.
Yeah.
And we were all pretty new, so it was also like there was that too. Like we maybe he's doing different mics or working at a couple different clubs than what I might have been stepping my toe into.
Yeah.
It was a good experience, and my wife's dad's side of the family lives in Louisville, so like we also had a lot of family coming out to it, so that was cool. And then did Red Clay in Atlanta a couple of years later, which is an awesome festival. So yeah, festivals were one way to get out of the city. I also was doing private gigs. I kind of got into doing like a lot of private like clean headlining clean shows like in the Jewish circuit. Which is a whole other thing, very difficult to do because when they, clean for like a religious audience is very clean. And so that's a difficult thing, but it's also a thing that not a lot of people can do. So it's a little niche that you can get into.
Yeah. What were you headlining? You were headlining those? What length of set was that? Was that an hour or is that like?
45.
Okay. That's a long time to be.
Yeah. Sometimes they want an hour and sometimes it become an hour.
Scene.
It's funny, like when you're doing a long set, if the audience is good enough, a 45-minute can become an hour. It's not too hard for that to happen. That you're vibing with the crowd, you're riffing a bit, they're laughing, you're not rushing through your jokes. And then other times you look at your clock and you're finished, you're like, oh, 38. What happened to me?
Did you find those gigs to be fun relative to the club spots you were doing?
Not really. Club spots are fun because you have a random audience of a wide spread of the population. You could kind of do anything material wise. And sometimes it's wrong for the audience. Sometimes you're way too dark or just doing something that's way too local maybe. And they're tourists, so they don't get it. So you have there's like that risk of like, you don't know what you're going to get with these kind of shows. For like a synagogue audience, you kind of know what the crowd's going to be like. They're generally going to be pretty, they want clean, of course. They might be a little bit shocked if you do anything that's a little bit risque. They have certain, if you're doing a show for a congregation, they're all going to be local to that area. So you don't have to worry necessarily that they're not going to understand a New York reference if you're doing a show in the New York area for this crowd. But if they're very religious, they might not get a pop culture reference because maybe they're not that into watching Netflix or something. So trial and error in that kind of way. It's hard. And also they're not always the biggest laughing crowds. That's the hardest part is after a show at these kind of private gigs, they'll often tell you like, that was great. We loved it. But you're like, well, why didn't you make noise during it? Because you just feel like you're failing sometimes, but you're actually doing good. They just are, for various reasons, they're nervous. Can I laugh at this? Is the rabbi watching me? If I laugh at this, is that too dirty? They're too in their head sometimes about it.
Sure.
So
did those pay well? Was that the primary reason you were doing them, or were you doing them so that you could do longer sets?
Well, I'll do anything for a longer set. Number one, like even if something didn't pay well, like if it's local and it doesn't pay that well, if you have a chance to do like a long set, that's great because like stage time is so valuable when you're trying to work out a long set. But these do pay well, so that's definitely great. It's like there are very few comics who are trusted to do shows for these kind of audiences because most people who say they can do clean for a long amount of time can't do it actually, or they just go into topics that are just like way off base for the audience. They don't know what they're doing. So finding a comic that they could trust, they're willing to pay a good amount of money for that. So it's nice to have like high paying gigs to feel like, all right, I'm a working paid comedian. This is what it's all about. Even if they're not the most fun gig, it's like, it's doing a corporate. You're doing a corporate gig basically.
Yeah.
It's
totally. Have you done those outside of New York City or are those mostly in the city?
No, I've done those all over. So I've done those in, San Diego, Arizona, Florida, Philadelphia, anywhere basically. I'll fly around for those.
And do you cold open when you do those?
Usually, it's just me. It's it. And and it's like a running joke in the scene where sometimes like the person introducing you will just give you the worst possible intro to a comedy show. You know, I mean, I did this one, and it was like the height of COVID, a little bit post the height, I guess, because we were live at a show. But this guy got up and he was just saying, like, listen, the community, we want to thank the local hospital because people have been, you know, so and so was on like donated respirators to the hospital, and even though this person and this person passed in the last few weeks, like, we're just still so thankful because so and so and so and so are still hanging in there in the ICU, and it was all this stuff about people dying of COVID, and then it was like, so here's our comedian, and it's just horrible. Or you'll have the rabbi will get up and it'll be like Holocaust Remembrance Day or something.
Oh my goodness.
So there's that. It's heavy, or they'll try to do a joke. Sometimes they'll say like, "Oh, we have a local guy who likes to do jokes, so he'll do a joke before you go up," and it's like some horrible street joke. But even that, I'm happy. I'm like, anything, just do anything that resembles comedy, because I don't want to just go up there totally.
Yeah,
you know,
you don't want the in memoriam preceding your comedy act.
But it happens, and that's okay. Like, you know, they're paying you a lot of money, so if that's what it is, and that's what it is. But there are also times where they're like, we want to have a 60-minute show or a 75-minute show, and I'll say, okay, that's fine. But you know what? In that case, like, let me bring an opener. I'll bring someone to do the first 15 minutes, which is good for me, and it's good for them, because that way I'm not stretching to do a show that's longer than what I want to do for these people, because people's attention span, even if you have the material for it, no one wants to sit and watch the same person for too long unless it's someone that they really like a lot. And so having an opener just helps break it up. It helps them warm up the crowd. It always makes for a better show.
Yes, I agree, 100%. Okay, so we're moving along your journey at a pretty good clip here. We're churning the cream still.
Yeah,
it's firming up. So you're doing these gigs. You're going around the country. You're getting into the festival stuff. And so what happens after what's the next rung in New York City after these late night spots? You're moving up with that Eddie Murphy guy. You're getting put in a 3-4 spot. What happens?
Yeah, and I'm getting some regular book spots, which is good. So I'm like, you know, and also like at Broadway Comedy Club, which is where I had originally been I was interning in New York, but it was owned by Broadway. So even though now New York has new owners, and I'm getting some spots there periodically, not a lot, but enough to keep me interested, you know, to make me not feel too self-conscious about why I'm not getting booked, which always creeps into every comic's mind. But at Broadway, which was owned by Al Martin still, who was the original owner of New York, I was getting regular like paid spots or hosting. I was doing a lot of hosting also then. So I was emceeing the shows. But that was actually really good, because at Broadway, the way that they would do their shows, and Broadway is a good club, like in that the downstairs room, the main room at this club in Midtown Manhattan, it fits like 200 plus people. It's a very big room with a big stage, and it's a very touristy crowd. They bring in a lot of people from Times Square, many who were lied to by the ticket sellers, which is difficult. They're always told commonly that like, oh, Tina Fey's going to be there, which is hilarious because she doesn't do stand-up. Yeah. But like, so you get a certain amount of people who just felt like, what am I here for? But they ended up getting a good show, even though they didn't get what they expected, which was like famous comedians. A lot of comics who were like comedy Cellar comics, which is always like, that's the marker of like, oh, if someone's a Cellar comic, you know, you're like, well, this guy is the real deal. These guys would work up at Broadway as well. So I would be emceeing the show, and they would do a 20-minute MC spot. So that's a lot of time for a New York show for the MC to be up there, which is great because I'm not Mr. Crowd Work. I'm a joke guy. So, but I can, I'll do a little bit of crowd stuff, but then mostly just be working on my set. So it was really, really good to do that for like a big regular audience. And then to be able to work with some great Cellar comics who, I think are hilarious, that maybe got to see some of my set and get to know me a little bit in this context. People who would be working up there would be guys like Brian Scott McFadden or Lenny Marcus, Marina Franklin, Aaron Jackson, like some really, really funny comics that I got to know up there. John Fish, who's one of my faves, a good friend of mine. So by working at this club as a paid comic, as a host or as doing spots, like you start to feel like you're a little bit part of the comedy community in that way. Like you've moved out of open mic or bringer. You moved out of just doing late night spots. you're kind of like actually in the mix of guy who gets paid for spots. And so that it feels like then you're sort of, to some degree, you feel like you're a little bit at the level of some of these better comedians.
Huh. That's amazing. Did anybody famous ever drop in to Broadway Comedy Club, or what you would consider pretty famous?
Well, one time Ray Liota was in the audience, so that was cool. He wasn't doing stand-up, but I was like, wait, Ray Liota's here? This is cool. This is awesome.
That's neat. Is he the most famous person you've ever performed for? Would you guess?
At that point in time, it was probably him. Yeah, I would say so.
I think, I don't know if you know this, but the year you were at Red Clay, that's where I first met you. I was there just watching shows.
Mm-hmm.
The woman who plays 11 in Stranger Things, I forget her name off the top of my head.
Millie Bobby
She was
Brown.
there. Yeah, Millie Bobby
like
Brown.
A 9-year-old, she was there.
She was like 12 years old or 14 years old.
Are you kidding?
She was,
oh wow.
Yeah, she was there. She was at one of the shows in the tent because they were filming in Atlanta, and she was not. I don't think the first season had come out yet.
That was 2018 when we were there, when we met. Okay. So I'm trying to think when first season of Stranger Things came out.
Yeah, somebody watching this can look it up.
I was that tent. I didn't get booked in any shows that were in the tent. That was a good festival, but they had like 7 or 8 different venues, and I was like, oh, the tent, that looks so cool.
Yeah.
So I guess I missed her. That would have been so cool if the show had come out and she was just there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody knew who she was. It wasn't until like 6 months later that I even heard that she had been there. But anyways, so
wow, that's cool.
I don't know if you consider her. I think Ray Liotta probably still has her, but to the younger generation, she's probably more famous.
Yeah, I'd say so. I remember one time when I was interning at New York Comedy Club, there was some rumor that like the night, maybe it was true, the night before when I was not there, that like Beyonce and Jay-Z had come in to watch the show.
Huh.
That kind of thing happens. That's the thing about New York. Like, it doesn't only happen at the Comedy Cellar, but you will have like just random major celebrities pop into any club in the city to watch a show, and it's just bizarre. It's like you're like, why are you here? You're seeing me do this.
This last summer, Bill Burr was doing that Broadway show. Did you run across him?
No, but I have in the past. I met him at the comic strip when we were doing late night one night. He dropped in, which was a thrill, like because he dropped in to do a spot on the show, and then we were all doing our late night spots like later on the same show essentially. So then it felt like I'm on the same show as Bill Burr. But I remember like we were all taking pictures with him by the bar, and we were like, "Do you have any advice for us? Like we're the late night comics, whatever." And he was like, he said something like, "Yeah, most of you will quit. You won't be doing this in a couple of years. It's which is good. You don't want to do this." It was like a real like downer kind of advice that you get sometimes.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Okay, so how close are we to current day now that you're hosting at Broadway Comedy Club?
So this is like, this is 2017, 2018, around that kind of range, I guess.
Oh, so we got a while to go, or unless you shut
COVID years, then I kind of, but yeah, it's like around this time. This is like the mix of kind of the shows I'm doing. I was also doing a lot of roast battles in this 2017, 2018 range. Part of that was because it was a way to get more stage time at places like The Stand or New York Comedy Club. They were both the two places that were really running the really, really good roast battles. And I like writing jokes. Like that's my thing. So like that helped me a lot actually. Because number one, your people get to see that your jokes are funny. You have the panel of judges who are, guys like Mike Lawrence would be judging, like, who was like the king of the roast battles, or like really great New York comics would be there to judge. So they'd be seeing you and get to know you, like, Big J, or, and like Louis J. Gomez was hosting the roast battles at the Stand at that time. And Sal Vulcano would be there as a judge. All these cool guys were like there and they'd see you and they'd be like, oh, this guy's really funny. That was really hilarious. So that was good to get a little bit more exposure in that kind of way. Some of these shows are part of like the New York Comedy Festival. So then you feel like you're part of that kind of mix to some degree. And you get some regular spots on the side for doing the roast battles. What it also helped with was like, it helped build a thick skin. At that time, my material, I'd say a lot of it wasn't too self-deprecating or too inward, because I was like always scared of like talking about faults, because I always felt like then the crowd will notice them. But then I realized, oh, they do notice these things already. Like they know that I'm short, or that I'm skinny, or whatever, these kind of things, or look like a virgin, whatever these sorts of things that come up in a roast battle. So people would say them to me. I'd, get huge laughs. They'd often beat me because of these horrible jokes they would say about me. But it kind of gave me a thick skin. I was like, yeah, whatever. It's comedy. Like, I can take it. I can take a laugh at my expense. I don't mind it. So then I started writing jokes a little bit more that had a little bit more of that kind of tinge to them in my act, which I think helped round out my act a bit. Which it made me, I think, a better comic, that I could handle this sort of thing. I could handle the pressure. We already have, as comics, the pressure of needing to get laughs every 15 seconds, basically, or you feel like you're a failure. But then also having these laughs directed at you and being able to take that, having people make fun of you and being able to take that and being able to dish it out too. That's a good skill to build. Through that, I was able to actually write. I got a joke on one of the roasts, the roast of Alec Baldwin for Jeff Ross. I was able to write some jokes for him.
Whoa, cool.
Through a mutual friend of ours, Dave Juskow, who's a close friend of Jeff's and is a close friend of mine, who I think I first met actually at one of these roast battles. He sent my jokes off to Jeff. Jeff used one of them on the air. It was incredibly exciting. That was amazing. Around this time, 2019, Dave Juskow, this guy who is my good friend, he was running a not monthly, maybe twice a year, actually, like a random show at the Comedy Cellar. He is close with the Comedy Cellar forever, but he's not a past comic there. He just somehow is like a fixture of the Cellar. It's a strange thing that's always perplexing everybody, including him. But he had like a birthday show. So anyway, he booked me for like a 5-minute spot on his birthday show at the Comedy Cellar, and I was able to perform.
Which room?
At the Village Underground, which is
cool.
It's the biggest room. They have 4 different rooms. There's the main room that everyone knows, which is like the prestigious, like
McDougal.
Wow, the McDougal room. I used to go sneak in there when I was a teenager to watch shows. But the Village Underground is bigger, and it's got a little bit more of almost like a theater kind of vibe. And everything just feels a little bit more high stakes when it's there. So he booked me on this show with all of his friends who were, Dave Attell and I think maybe Jeff Ross was on this show. Like all these amazing comics were on it. It was insane. It was like Gilbert Gottfried was on the show.
Cool.
So it was like incredible. And now I'm just like on it in the middle, and I do my, he booked me for a 5-minute thing. It was incredible. Like, the audience was great. I felt so good doing the show. After the show, like after my set, Dave Attell like told me that was really funny. So that was incredible. I was like, whoa, like a hero of mine is telling me that I'm good. I'm at the Comedy Cellar right now. This is so cool. So then I started thinking like, maybe I could try to, maybe I'm good enough for this. Maybe I could get the audition for the Comedy Cellar.
Sure.
But of course, like soon after that, COVID happens, right? So then like everything shuts down, as you all know. And now it's back to doing Zoom shows, just lots and lots of Zoom shows for several months, which was good too in its own way, because it teaches you how to bomb in ways that you didn't know existed. Because you're saying jokes to silence completely, or people have their sound off, or people are talking in their back. All the things. Yeah. And I think Mark, we did some Zoom shows together, at least one, I think during this time. I think. Yeah. So it's tough, but I think it helps also make you stronger to go through that. I know some comics who were like, I refuse to do a Zoom show, and look, that's fine, but I think it was helpful. So then there was Zoom, and then coming out of that, there were outdoor shows in New York City. So I was doing these shows in Central Park, where also you're just talking to, it's not good acoustically.
To squirrels
or any random person. You're just you're an insane person yelling in a park. But these are all good. It was unusual experiences, and then the clubs slowly came back, which was good. But what I should mention, and if I'm going on too long, let me know.
No, this is great.
So what I should mention, around this pre-COVID time, a little bit to back up, I started opening for a comic named Modi, who is blown up now, and he was in the Jewish comedy world at this time of like, really for the last 30 years, he is on the Mount Rushmore of like the most in-demand comics for these private Jewish gigs, these, the most prestigious gigs, for whether it's a corporate thing or a charity event or for a synagogue or for a big resort, whatever it is. Like, he's the king of that world, as well as being forever a fixture of the Comedy Cellar. He's, for any audience, he is one of the most hilarious comedians.
How do you spell his name?
Modi.
Okay.
Which is also the name of the Prime Minister of India, which is bad for his Google SEO. So I started opening for him on some gigs because my friend Eric Newman had been his regular opener, but Eric was getting his own gigs and wasn't always available. So he passed off some of these gigs to me. And then I started opening more regularly for Modi. And that was incredible because I learned so much watching Modi, how he could just command. I mean, this is a guy who, has so much experience and could handle any audience in any kind of way. Incredible at not just writing jokes, but how to like really deliver them in a way that like just builds the same way that a guy like Brian Regan can do, or Sebastian Maniscalco, the guys who like can just not just say the words.
Expressive.
Yeah, and you get so much more out of it that way. So like I just learned so much opening for him. And at some point, this is now, let's say, coming out of COVID. How did you
first fall into his universe?
It was really random. It was like Eric Newman, who was a great comic in New York, had been his opener.
Tonight Show, Cellar host.
Yeah. And he and I had been friends, and like I had booked him on I was doing some gig at a deli out in Queens, and I remember I had booked him on that show, and that's kind of, we started like talking more at that point, hanging out more. And then like we kind of just were, he was always like ahead of me in comedy for sure, but like we were close enough in the same range, and also doing some of these Jewish gigs where we could commiserate about the terrible audiences or sometimes good audiences.
Yeah.
So we became friendly, just through like doing the same kind of shows. But he knew that I did these sort of Jewish tinged shows, these clean shows. And so when Modi would always have these shows at Caroline's Comedy Club on the night before Christmas, because that was a good night for Jewish audiences to come out because we're not doing Christmas. And one year Eric couldn't do it, and so he recommended me to Modi to do his shows that night. And so that's when I first connected with Modi, who I had seen when I was 12 years old at some Catskills resort outside of New York in the 90s. So it's so crazy to be like, this is a comic that I remember seeing in the 90s as a little kid, talking to him after the show because I thought he was so funny, and he was like it was a young comedian, which was rare because most comics were super old that you'd see at these Catskill resorts, the Borscht Belt, as they say.
Right.
There's always like these 80-year-old guys, and here's some guy in his 20s. So I met him when I was like 12. I remember seeing him at the Cellar like in the early 2000s, and him being hilarious there. And then now, I get to open for him. This is great. So I became more regularly his opener. At some point after some show, he just said to me like, "Oh, have you ever auditioned for the Comedy Cellar?" And I was like, "No," because I would never ask that it was always one of those things I don't want to ask. It feels weird to be like, can you recommend me? But you need a recommendation. Yeah. The way the Cellar works is you have to be recommended by usually two comics who are there already to the booker, and then maybe you get an audition, and then she watches you, and she decides if you're in or if you're not. But he said, have you ever wanted to work there? And I was like, oh yeah, my dream is to work there. And he said, I'll talk to Esty, the booker, and he put the word in there. But it was one of those things where she says, yeah, maybe it'll be a little while. There's a lot of people I have to see. And so, maybe a few months passed. And then it just kind of happened. Actually, I think he had mentioned it again to her at the comics table where everyone hangs out. Like, oh yeah, I wanted to bring up again, Elon Altman. And then luckily at the same time, this other comic who I came up with, Eagle Witt, who is incredibly hilarious. Eagle, who had already been working at the Cellar for a couple of years, just happened to be at the table at the same time. And he said, oh yeah, Elon's tight. Those are his words. And and so maybe that kind of helped, that little extra whatever. And then Esty was like, okay, yeah, so have him like email me and I'll give him a date. And I got that audition, and and there I am now. I'm a Cellar comic all of a sudden.
I didn't realize you were passed at the Cellar, buddy. Yeah. You made it. You're there. Holy cow.
Yeah.
So tell us, how did your audition go?
So the audition was great. It was incredibly stressful. I had a date. It was like, I don't know, April 3rd, I think. This is 2022. And I'm just like, leading up to it, you're just thinking like, okay, I know I have 5 minutes. I know, because I talked to some comics who have auditioned before, and also comics who have hosted the auditions. Guys like John Fish, who frequently hosts at the Cellar, who can tell me the things that auditions go wrong for. So I knew like what to avoid.
Hey, Elon, sorry. Let's actually put a pin in this and pick it up into Patreon, because this is great content. People are going to want to hear how you succeed in an audition at the Cellar. So this was great. Everybody who's listening, incredible conversation with Elon Altman. Let's talk about, let's promote some stuff real quick. I'm trying to figure out when this is coming out. Does anybody know? Where are we? This comes out
2028.
October 13th, 2025. I am October 13th. I'm in Twin Falls, Idaho, October 23rd, Richland, Washington, 24th, 25th, Everett, Washington. I'm up in the Seattle area after that. And then I'm featuring at Rooster T. Feathers on November 2nd in Sunnyvale, California. People look out for that. Markmasters.co has all my dates, also a contact form. If you want a Gentile to perform at your synagogue, I'm available.
They love Gentiles. They love, if you could be not Jewish and do clean material, that's so refreshing for them to not have to hear the same Jewish jokes.
Yes, I have done a Jewish show out in the San Francisco area.
Cool.
So Big Jake, what do you got? October 13th and beyond.
Yeah, Georgetown College, Georgetown, Kentucky. Yeah, so
not the Hoyas.
Not that Georgetown College, but and then Evansville on the 25th. So Evansville, Indiana.
BigJakeComedy.com.
BigJakeComedy.com.
All right, Elon Altman, what do you got coming up?
You can find me on Instagram at Elonstagram, ELON Stagram, STAGRAM. And my OnlyFans are my parents. So I like to say that at the end of shows.
Incredible. Thanks for your time.
And then as far as upcoming shows, the usual stuff around New York. But one thing that I'm looking forward to coming up on November 10th, which is part of the New York Comedy Festival, there's a show called Schtick or Treat.
Oh, yeah. Do you know who you're going to do? Are you allowed to say?
Yes. Almost certain that my character will be Ozempic Ralphie May.
That's incredible. Incredible. Oh my gosh.
So I have to write it still, but that's my idea. And that's going to be at the Gramercy Theater on November 10th. It's a reboot of the show. Schtick or Treat used to happen pre-COVID. It was always the most fun Halloween themed show in New York.
Incredible.
All these great
How do you spell Schtick? Is it
SCHTICK?
Yeah. If anybody out there wants to Google that and Sebastian Maniscalco, the funniest set I think I've ever seen that was Schtick or Treat. I don't know if you know who that person was.
JP McDade did it,
yeah.
I think.
I don't know who it was, but his Sebastian Maniscalco impression is so funny.
Yeah, JP McDade, Sebastian was incredible. I'm pretty sure it was him doing it. If it wasn't him, watch him do anything Schtick or Treat because his stuff is always great. Another really good one from back then was Tyler Fisher did a really good Bill Burr, like a spot on Bill Burr back then.
I haven't seen that one. I'm going to check it out. That's amazing.
And I did one called Snitch Hedberg, which you should also check out, which was Mitch Hedberg. All his jokes are about snitching on his friends.
Oh,
I let you think of weird twists.
Incredible. Okay, we're about to go into the Patreon. That's patreon.com/Mark and Jake, MarkandJake. We're going to talk about auditioning at the Comedy Cellar. I had a low for the year for 2025 this week. A comedy low. I'm going to share that story exclusively in the Patreon. Jake, you got anything hot and steamy?
Yeah, I got. There was a review that came in at a comedy club I was at, and it was real mean.
Okay, all right. So we'll catch you guys at the Patreon. Thanks for tuning in to Mark and Jake Try to Make It. Maybe we'll have some more guests in the future. This was a smashing success. Thank you so much, Elon. Everybody, have a great week.